Finding one's creative style is something I think most photographers and artists are seeking, those one or maybe two qualities that really stands out amongst the crowd that would enable someone to see our images and instantly know whose photo it was. But trying to discover and build out your own creative style is a rather difficult thing to accomplish. And I personally think that you really can't find your own creative style. Rather, I feel that your creative style is something that finds you over time. But in the interim, while you're waiting for your creative style to track you down, there are still plenty of fun and effective ways to get creative inside of Lightroom. And one of the best ways to do this is by utilizing some of the many tools available to really manipulate and enhance color. And specifically speaking, the new color wheels that have been recently implemented. Now, if you're not familiar with what color wheels are or what they can do for your photographs or even how to use them, you're in luck because by the time you complete this class, you'll be a bona fide expert on the topic. So what are color wheels? So at a very high level, in a real basic description, color wheels basically give you the ability to tone certain areas of your photograph. And Lightroom breaks these areas of your photograph down into three regions. You have your highlights, your midtones, and your shadows. So you basically have the ability to tone the highlights, midtones, and shadows of your photograph a certain color. You can tone them all the same color. You can tone them all different colors. Maybe you only want to tone the highlights. You don't have to tone all three regions, but at a real basic description, that is what color wheels are. And I think this right here is a fantastic illustration of that. So this right here is just your basic grayscale. It, for the most part, represents what a histogram is. You have your areas of pure black here on the left side. You got your areas of shadows right through here. You have your midtones in the center, and then you have the highlights right through here, and then you have pure white on the right side. So exactly how a histogram is represented. So if we come down here to the color grading section, and if you don't see this color grading section in your Lightroom, you can just right click on any of these, hit Customize Develop Panel, and just make sure that you have color grading checked right there. So what we'll do is we're going to drop this down to color grading, and you'll see that it is broken down by midtone, shadows, and highlights. And it's also the same up here as well. So this is your shadows, this is your midtones, and this is your highlights right here. So if we click on highlights, and we only work at this right here, work on the highlights right here, I should say. Let's just click this little palette right here, and I just want you to see exactly what happens. So let's just select this color right there, and I'm going to turn the saturation up quite a bit, just so it's easy to see, all the way to about right there. And you'll notice that this color right here is only being, I should say, illuminated in the areas of highlights. Now if we do the opposite, let's come over here to shadows. And let's pick a shadow color. So let's just pick this blue. And let's turn that saturation up all the way so it's very easy to see. And now you'll notice that all of the shadow area is toned that blue color. And if we pick the midtones, let's pick a completely opposite color. Let's pick a green color right through here. And you'll notice that only the midtones are being tinted with that green color. So that's a great representation of exactly how this is working here. So you can see the highlights are tinted this kind of orange color. You got the shadows being tinted with this blue color, and then you have the midtones being tinted with the green color right through here. So that's a fantastic illustration of exactly what's happening when we utilize these color wheels to tone certain regions of our photograph. Now, what we can also do, let's just reset this. What we can do is let's come over here to highlights. And the way this works is you have your hue here and you have your saturation here, or you can just drag the center ball around to certain areas of your photograph. And as you can see right through here, the hue and the saturation numbers are changing as we move this around. And once you find a color that you like, so let's say maybe this red color right through here, this reddish pink color right through there, you can leave it there, and then you can actually turn the saturation up right through here by kind of sliding this back and forth. Or you can actually grab the ball here and you'll see that little line illuminate, and then you can kind of drag it out towards the outer portion of the circle, and that's going to be more saturation. And then when you drag it back towards the inner portion of the circle, that's less saturation. And you can actually see that the center area of the circle right through here is pure white. And as you move this towards the outer portion, that's going to be more saturation. And then as we kind of drag this around right here, you'll notice that the hue number is changing as well. And that's just a real quick description of exactly how the color wheel actually operates. And I think that's a fantastic illustration of what's actually transpiring when we start to manipulate the different color wheels, different regions of our actual photograph. Now, what's really cool is let's go back to maybe shadows. And let's pick a shadow color right through here, this blue color. You also have this luminance slider right here. And if you're not familiar with what luminance is, it's basically the brightness value of a specific color. So what we can do is, if you turn this down, you'll notice that that blue color gets a little bit darker in the shadows. And as we kind of bring it up, you'll notice how much brighter it's getting. So you actually have the ability to change the brightness level of these colors as well, which is very, very, very handy as well. Let's go back up to highlights again. I want to pick this color here. Let's just turn this all the way up right through there. And you also have this color palette right here, these default colors here. And you can pick any of them. This is pure white. This is yellow, kind of a beige, darker blue, lighter blue. And you can change those color palettes to anything that you like. Those are the custom colors that I think Lightroom comes with as a default, but you can change them to whatever you want. But I usually leave them there. But you also have the ability to blend. So if you want to, let me just go back to highlights again. I want to make this highlight color, let's say this color here. Let's turn this all the way up, and then we have the shadows all the way dark down through there. And then the blending is basically how you want to put emphasis on the highlights versus the shadows and the midtones. So if you slide it all the way to the left, that's putting more emphasis on the actual shadows. And if you put it more to the right, that's putting more emphasis on the highlights. And it just has to do with how those blend together. I really don't use that too much. The balance is a kind of a similar functionality too. If you slide it more towards the left, you can definitely see that's more heavily weighted on the shadow area. If you slide it more to the right, that's definitely going to be more heavily weighted on the highlights. And then the blending is just how the different tones blend together. But generally speaking, I usually leave those set at the default. I don't mess with them too much. But that's kind of a basic rundown of the color wheel section. You can actually click on the three areas right here. This shows you all three of them together. You have the midtones at the top, you have the shadows right here, and then the highlights there. And if you want to reset any of them, you can just double click on them and it'll reset. You can see that circle ball kind of goes right back to the center area right through there. So I know that was a ton of information in a relatively short amount of time, but I wanted to kind of get the basic I guess, order of operation out of the way first before we just start jumping into some specific images and how you can apply it and really what it does. You know, there's a lot of things that color wheels enable you to do, even outside of just getting creative. There's a lot of problems that can help solve in landscape and outdoor photography. And there's a lot of situations that it can really enhance and improve upon as well. Now, I think this is a great example right here. And this is perhaps one of my favorite things to do with the actual color grading section or with color wheels. And it's the ability to basically tint the highlights of an image, a warmer color or a color that's already naturally occurring in your photograph. And what it basically does is if you have a sunrise or a sunset image, tinting the highlights a warm color just makes that sunrise or that sunset seem even more explosive, even more vibrant. And I'll show you exactly what I mean right here. And it's so simple to do. It literally takes just a few seconds. So I'm going to click highlights here. I generally like to work in this type of a view versus this view. I like to just kind of stay a little bit more focused on one area that I'm working on. So if we have the highlights selected right here. And if we come down here to the default colors, I really like to use this center one right here. If we select that, and let's just kind of turn it up. I'm going to turn it up a little bit more than I normally would, just so you can easily see it at home. I'm going to grab this circle right here. We're just going to start dragging it towards the outer portion of the color wheel. And if I toggle this on and off, you can really see it. So this is before and after. Before and after. And I'll do it one more time. Before and after. And you can really see how all that color really kind of builds in right there. And it's one of my favorite things to do with these color wheels. And like we mentioned earlier, you actually have control over the luminance value too. So as I kind of rock this back and forth, you can see what that's doing as well to that highlight region. Maybe make it a little bit brighter right through there. Not too much, but I think to that point looks good. And something else that's important to note is if you look right here, you see this is the highlight section right here. You can see that there's a little dot there, and that little dot indicates that we've made an adjustment to the highlights. So if I come over here to the shadows, and let's just pick a random color right there, you'll notice that there's now a dot there as well. And if I double click the center of this, you'll notice that that dot goes away. You actually don't have to double click the center of it to reset it. You can really just double click anywhere and that'll reset it. So that's just something important to note, just that little dot right there. So let me just go back to the highlights. I'm not gonna have the luminance turned up. I usually leave the luminance set at 0, but every once in a while, I will kind of increase or decrease the luminance value of a particular tone that I add to a certain region of an image. So that's one of the really cool benefits of utilizing color wheels, is to really exaggerate the sunrise or a sunset. So let's go to this image right here. So I'm going to go, we have the highlights section illuminated, or selected I should say, and let's pick that warm color once again. You can kind of drag it up and you can kind of see, and then sometimes it's kind of hard to see the effect as you're applying it, but once you start to toggle the on and off switch, that's before and after, before and after, and you can really see what that is doing to that area. I have one more example right through here. This is from a recent trip to Acadia National Park. So let me select the highlights again, and then let's just pick this warmer color right through here. Kind of turn this up a little bit, maybe to about, I'm trying to find exactly what color I want to use. And this is kind of what I like to do too, as I have the saturation circle here, and I kind of have it moving towards left and right, I should say, towards less saturation towards the center, towards more saturation towards the outside, and then kind of move it around a little bit. And I'm really paying attention to this area right through here, because that's the area of the photograph that has the greatest, I should say, concentration of highlights. And that's really the area that I want to exaggerate. I really want to make that area pop a little bit more. So I'm just going to kind of just move this around a little bit until I can find a color that I think already complements the color that's naturally occurring in the sky. Maybe something about right there looks good. And if I toggle this on and off, that's off and on, or before and after. So in my personal opinion, that is one of the greatest benefits of utilizing the color grading tool or color wheels, is just to really exaggerate the setting sun or the rising sun. I would have to say for landscape and outdoor photographers, your portfolios, I know my portfolio is just filled with tons of those golden hour images, sunrise and sunset, and utilizing this technique is a great way to really kind of make those images pop a little bit more. Now, another fantastic, I should say, benefit or attribute of utilizing this technique is that it can also fix certain problems that are fairly common in outdoor landscape photography. And in this next example right here is a fantastic representation of that. So this is an image from Yosemite National Park. This is Bridalveil Falls. And in the morning time, you can see the sun very low on the horizon, just casting this kind of soft, diffuse, real ethereal light across the waterfall. And it looks absolutely fantastic. I love this image. But if you look at the shadow area down here, you'll notice how cool and blue this area is. Now, shadows typically kind of have this cooler, blue tones associated with it, but sometimes they can get a little bit carried away and look somewhat unnatural. And I think that this example right here is a perfect example of that. So if we want to kind of remove this blue color cast from the shadow area, it's very simple to do. We can just come up here to the shadow section of your color wheel. We will select that, and then we can just drag this over towards a warmer tone. And you'll notice what's happening to that shadow region right through there. So if we just pick something, let's say right there, and toggle this on and off. This is before and after, before and after. And that completely removed that blue color cast across the shadow area in a very, very simple manner. So, and you can, it doesn't have to be a warmer color. You can tint it really any color that you like. I typically, if there's a blue color cast in the shadows, I will usually try and tint it a warmer color. I usually don't try and put any kind of like magentas, or I definitely don't want to make it any cooler than it already is. And I don't put any greens in there. It's usually a warmer tone, something to that effect. And if you wanted to, you could actually tint the highlights in this image as well. There's already plenty of warm tones in the highlights of this photograph, so I probably wouldn't tint them any warmer, but if you wanted to, we have the highlight selection right here. We could just kind of drag this up a little bit to maybe a point right there. I wouldn't want to get too carried away to anything like that, because that definitely doesn't look natural at all, but maybe something to about right there. And if we toggle the entire edit on and off, that's before and after, before, oops, close down the whole thing, before and after. So that's another great benefit of utilizing color grading tool and utilizing color wheels to correct common issues in landscape photography. And I got another good example right here. This is a close-up, a telephoto shot of the base of Yosemite Falls. And actually, I love this photograph. It's I really enjoy, I should say, the areas of highlights and how they're interacting with the areas of shadows. So if I wanted to kind of warm those shadows up a little bit, we could go through the same exact technique right here. So we could select the shadow area right here and then kind of warm this up just a touch to about maybe right through there. And I mean, not green, but something to maybe that effect right there. And if we turn it on and off, that's before and after, before and after. And we could also do the same thing with the midtones. Let me kind of pull the shadows, that shadow tint back just a touch. We'll select midtones. Maybe we want to warm the midtones up just a little bit to maybe a point right there, and toggle the entire edit on and off. So that's before and after, before and after. So you can really see that there's no longer that contrasting color, those really, really cool shadows and the very warm highlights. Now, sometimes you might want that, and I think a lot of times that actually looks good when you have those kind of contrasting tones. But if you have areas of your photograph that have those unusually cool, kind of dark blue shadows, color grading tool and color wheels is a fantastic way to kind of get those shadows more in balance with the highlights. But in this particular situation, let's reset this. Let's double click on the midtones, double click on the shadows. Let's say we want to cool those shadows down even more. We could come down here and select one of the pre-populated colors right there. That's kind of a nice light blue color, as you can see right there. And maybe with the shadow or the highlights, let's select this color right here. So basically what we're doing is we're exaggerating the color of the shadows a little bit. We're making them a little bit more blue, and we're actually making the highlights a little bit more warm than they actually are, just to create contrasting colors in those overall tones. And we could even bring the luminance of the highlights up just a touch and come back to shadows and maybe bring the luminance of the shadow tones down just a little bit. And let's toggle this effect on and off. So this is before and after, before and after. And you can really see how that kind of separated the tonal range of those colors. And that's just another great creative way to utilize the color grading tool. And then here's another good example right here, just extreme highlights, warm highlights, cool shadows. Kind of go through this one a little bit quicker. We could warm those highlights up just a touch. I'm sorry, those were the shadows. Let me reset that. Let's say we want to cool those shadows down even more than they already are. We could do that, and we could warm up the highlights like this. So if you wanted to keep that separation there, we could toggle this on and off. This is before and after, before and after. And what's really cool is if you look at the very top of Half Dome where the setting sun is kind of illuminating it, when I toggle this on and off, you can see how those highlights, it almost makes it look like the sun is shining even brighter on the top of Half Dome. I'm going to actually make this a little bit stronger. I'm going to turn the luminance up a little bit more because I really want you to be able to see this at home. And if you just pay attention to this area up through here. So this is before and after, before and after. And that just makes such a difference right through there. Now, for this particular image, I probably wouldn't do that. I would probably want to warm up the shadows just a touch. So I'm going to come back to the shadow area right through here. And let's just reset this. Maybe we'll select this color right through here. And you can see what that's doing to the shadow area there. That's before and after, before and after. And that kind of just brought it a little bit more in line with the highlights, so there isn't quite such a disparity. But you can see how there's really just a multitude of different ways that you can utilize the color grading tool to not only exaggerate sunrises or sunsets, but also to fix those overly cool or maybe overly blue shadow regions of your actual photograph. So, and here's another, this is actually, what's cool about this photograph right here is this is just a zoomed in picture of this region right through here. And I just love those, the kind of the yin and the yang between the highlights up through here and the cool tones right through here. And if I wanted to exaggerate that, we could simply just come up here to the highlight area, kind of warm those highlights up a touch, come over to the shadow area, kind of bring those down just a little bit, before and after, before and after. So just to kind of review quickly of the things that we've discussed so far. So color wheels are fantastic for exaggerating the color in the rising sun or the setting sun, and it's also fantastic for resolving those areas of the overly cool or overly blue shadow regions as well. Now there's also tons of just creative ways to play with the color grading tool, and I think it's one of the I think the entire editing process is a lot of fun. I love everything about it. But color grading, I think, is probably the thing that is the most fun to kind of experiment with. And I think a lot of this has to do with finding your own creative style as well. But just playing around with just different color combinations is a ton of fun. You can burn up a ton of time just messing around with certain combinations to see what might look good in a particular image. And here's a good example right here from the Nepali coast. We could come over here to the highlights. I mean, the natural thing in this scenario would be to just kind of warm those highlights up just a touch. So just to kind of drag it over here to this region, just to kind of exaggerate the appearance or the illusion almost that the sun is setting. It was setting in this scenario, but it was probably around 4:30 in the afternoon. The sun was low, but it wasn't anywhere close to actual golden hour. But by adding that kind of warmer color to the highlights, it kind of creates that illusion that it was during golden hour. So if I turn this on and off, this is before, and if you really just look through here in the cloud region, that's before and after, before and after, and that made a world of difference. And then we could come over here to the mid-tone region of the photograph. We could kind of tint this a warmer color as well, just to kind of really exaggerate that look that golden light is coming across these the fins of this the mountain range right through here. And then with the shadow area, we could kind of cool that down a little bit just to kind of create those contrasting colors. Maybe to something about right there. Let's toggle this on and off. That's before and after, before and after. And sometimes what's kind of a cool technique is what probably wouldn't work on this one, but tinting the colors of the shadows, tinting those tones a greener color can sometimes create that cinematic look a little bit. But utilize, and you'll probably seen a theme so far throughout this entire video of tinting the highlights a warmer color and tinting the shadows maybe a cooler color. And that's that whole kind of teal and orange look. That's a very popular color combination. Very popular with cinema, and it does work really, really well. So, but let's just say that we wanted to tint these shadows maybe a completely different color. So maybe something that's, actually let me turn the mid-tones off because that's a little bit too much. But we could come over here to the shadow region, and we could tint this anything that we wanted to. You could tint it a magenta color, maybe more red, yellow, green, maybe it's light blue, or maybe you just don't tint the shadows at all. So I think that's what's really cool is that you don't always have to tint the highlights. You don't always have to tint the midtones and the shadows. Actually, there's very, very few photographs where I've utilized this tool and have toned the highlight, shadows, and midtones a certain color. Usually, if I am going to use this tool, I will almost always use it to warm up the highlights a touch. And every once in a while, I'll use it to maybe correct the shadow regions of a photograph, or maybe just kind of change that shadow tone just a little bit as well. Here's another example right through here. Once again, from Kauai along the Nepali coast, we could come over here to the highlights. And if I wanted to add a little bit more color coming into the clouds up through here, we could just come over here to the highlight area. Let's kind of warm those up just a little bit. Maybe to a point, maybe right there. And if we toggle this on and off, and if you just pay attention to the sky right through here, this is before and after, before and after. That might have been just a little bit too much. Select that right there. That's probably my favorite color right there in the center to tone highlights. I think that's a perfect hue. I think it's a perfect saturation level, and it really works well. And this is before and after. And then with the shadows, I probably wouldn't do anything with the shadows right through here, but if we wanted to, we could utilize maybe that same color right through here as well, and you can really see what that's done to the overall photograph. Before and after, before and after. And that's something else that you can do with this, is you can use it to affect the overall white balance of your photograph. So if you have an image that looks overly cool, maybe you don't have to go up to the color balance and kind of warm it up a little bit. I should say not the color balance, the white balance, and warm it up. You could come over here to the color grading section and just warm up those highlights or warm up the midtones or the shadows, and that can completely warm up an entire photograph, which it did in this image right here. So this is the image before, and it does look a little bit cooler, but now after tinting the shadows and the highlights, you can see how much warmer it is now. This is before and after, before and after. So a total difference in that image as well. Here's another example, and this is one of this image right here. I think is in my final version of this photograph, I did end up tinting these highlights quite a bit because I think the overall end result in this particular image was absolutely fantastic. It was a real dramatic change. So one of my favorite things about this photograph, this is from the Oregon coast, is the sun was kind of right over here in this region. There wasn't really anything interesting going on in the sky. The sun was just this massive overblown highlight area. So I just wanted to make sure it was outside of my frame, but I wanted to be able to capture a lot of that soft diffused light kind of raking across the coastline, because it created a lot of three-dimension and structure to these cliffs that were hugging the coastline. So if I come over here to the color grading section, and let's go to highlights, and let's warm this up. Look what it is doing to those highlights right there. And I'm definitely overdoing it, but I want you to be able to easily see it. And if I toggle this on and off, this is before and after. Before and after. And that is a massive change. And I think that this is a fantastic example of how the power of color grading, these color wheels, can completely transform your outdoor and your landscape photographs. And then with the actual shadow area right through here, we could do something with that as well. Let's get a little bit creative. Let's just see, you could kind of tint this very light green. You can see that the saturation is only at 4, and we barely moved it away from the center area. So it's just barely adding a little bit of green into the shadow regions of this photograph. And if we let's just move this around a little bit. And what I like to do is kind of turn the saturation up and then to swing it around a little bit. And when you find a hue that you like, then you can kind of decrease it some by bringing that center circle down towards the center portion of the wheel to decrease that saturation level. So maybe right there. And if you're looking for any type of fine tuning, I know sometimes when you're dragging circles around these color wheels, it's hard to get really precise. At least for me it is. But what you can do is, once you find a hue you like, if you want to refine a little bit, you can select it right here, and you can just use your arrow keys to increase it and decrease it. And if you pay attention to the hue wheel or hue circle, I should say, when I move this around, you can see that it is moving around the circle. So you can do that to kind of refine it a little bit. And if you can do the same thing with saturation. So once you have saturation selected, and if you pay attention to this center circle here, as I move the saturation around, you can see what it is doing. And I'm just doing this with the arrow keys. So that's a really good way to just get a little bit more precise on the selections that you're making. So I think something about right there, if we want to get a little bit creative with this, we warmed up the highlights and we kind of tinted the shadows this kind of green color a little bit. And if we toggle this on and off, so this is before and after, before and after. And what's really cool is if you find a color grading setup that you like, so if you had this combination that you really enjoy, so for this particular image, I kind of like the way that we tinted the highlights, this really warm color, and we kind of tinted the shadows, this very subtle green color. And maybe that's something that we want to save and maybe apply it to other photographs moving forward. You can easily save this as a preset. So what we could do is just come over here to this side, come over here to presets, and just hit this plus. We'll hit create preset. and then title this, let's see, Color Wheel 1. And then just make sure that you actually have that selected. We can actually, let's check none. And then just come over here to color grading and just select that and hit create. And now we have this here. So let's reset this. Whoops, come back up here to color grading, double click the wheel, double click highlights, and we have completely reset this. So if we turn this on and off, you'll notice that nothing is changing. So the entire edit that we put on the color grading section has been turned off. But if we come over here to color wheel 1, you can see as soon as I hover over it, it applies that on there. And what's really neat is the more you use these color grading tools, these color wheels, you'll discover and you'll create a ton of different combinations that you really enjoy. Save them as a preset. And it's a really cool way to, once you have an edit on an image, just to kind of scroll through some of those presets you've already created to see if there's a color grading combination that you like. So I really do like the way that that looks. And let me turn this preset area off, expand this area a little bit. Now, let me go to this image here. Now, I think that this is a good example of a situation you want to be aware of. Now, this happens a lot of times when you are trying to color grade water. So if you want to add any kind of highlight tone to a water area, or to I should say, if you're trying to tone the highlights of a photograph that happens to have moving water in it, you want to be careful. You want to be aware of something that inevitably will happen. And I'll show you right here. So this is an image from a waterfall in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Of course, it's shot during the fall. I'm going to come over here to the color grading section. We have highlights selected right through here. And let's say that we want to warm up those highlights. Now you might be asking yourself, Mark, this isn't a sunrise or a sunset photograph. You know, what are you illuminating, or what are you trying to exaggerate? But what's cool, especially with autumn photos, is all the highlights in the trees. You can kind of warm that up a little bit, and that's going to make those fall colors just kind of pop even more. So let's kind of add this a little bit here, and let's turn this on and off. So this is before and after, and if you pay attention all right through here, you can really see it. Let me turn it up a little bit more just so it's a little more obvious. So this is before and after, before and after, and you can really see how it kind of makes those fall colors pop a little bit more. But it creates a very, very important issue that you should be aware of. It's not a deal breaker. I don't think it ruins photos, but sometimes it can create a look that you might not want. So if you pay attention to the water area right through here, especially right in this region, when I toggle this on and off. So this is before and after, before and after. And you'll notice that the water is now being tinted that color as well, because those are extreme highlights in the water right through there. That's almost pure white. So those areas of highlights are also going to receive that tone. And I'll do it again. So this is pure white almost. And this is after the split tone. So before, I should say the color grading, and after, before and after. So that's something you want to be aware of. And it's something that it gets me from time to time, because there's images. I shoot a lot of waterfalls, and a lot of times I want to split tone. I keep calling it split tone. I want to color grade the actual highlights, but it'll also color grade the highlights in the water. And a lot of times I don't want to do that. And in this particular image, I don't like what it's done to the water. I like the water like this color, but not necessarily like that color. So that's something you want to be aware of whenever you're color grading any type of moving water. It doesn't have to, it's not always with waterfalls. It can be the ocean, it can be rivers or streams, or any time you have any kind of moving water, because that moving water will almost always have a lot of highlights in it. So if you're tinting the highlights a certain color, that water is going to get that color tone as well. And then for this particular image, we could actually, let's go back to that preset we did, and let's just see what it would do to this image. So we could apply that there. Let me close this down so you can see it better. This is before and after, before and after. It definitely gave this image a more kind of cinematic feel. I think whenever you tint certain areas of your image that a subtle green color, I think that's a really easy way to create that cinematic look. So if we come over here to the shadow area, you can see that it put that green tone in there. Maybe if we kind of swing it around just a little bit, maybe more towards a cooler color, you can see what that's doing right through there. Maybe let's just experiment with taking the highlights. Maybe we take the highlights to a cooler color as well and to see what that's doing. And that's not doing anything super exciting in my opinion, but it's definitely fun to just to kind of mess around with as well. So as you can see, there's a ton of different ways that you can use the color grading and the color wheels inside of Lightroom to really get creative with your photographs. Like I said, when you find a color combination that you really enjoy, I would highly recommend creating a preset for that so you can revisit that at a later point to see if it's something that you might enjoy putting on another photograph. But this is so much fun to use. It's one of my favorite techniques to really kind of explode those sunrise and sunset situations, tinting those highlights, that warmer color that might already naturally be occurring in the sky. It's also fantastic at correcting those overly blue and sometimes overly cool tones that happens to be present in the shadows. And it's just a ton of fun to get highly creative with your photographs to try and create that personal style, that artistic vision that we were talking about at the beginning of this class. So I think that color grading is a fantastic way to try and move more towards your own creative style. Like I mentioned earlier, I think creative style is a very difficult thing to try and create on your own. So to set out and say, you know what, today I'm going to create my own creative style. It's a very difficult thing to do, but over time, I think your creative style will eventually find you, and you'll find out what kind of sets your images apart, what makes your images kind of stand out to someone that would look at it and be like, oh, I know who made that photograph. I can tell by the way that they tone the colors in their photograph, or they have this certain editing style. Well, I think the color grading tool inside of Lightroom is just a tremendous way to try and achieve that. So I really do hope that you feel substantially more comfortable using the color grading tool inside of Lightroom now. It's a very simple and straightforward tool to use. It's a ton of fun, and the possibilities are literally endless as to what it can do for your outdoor and landscape photos and in any type of photograph you happen to be using. So I should say, whatever type of photograph you happen to be editing. So easy for me to say. If you have any questions, I'm easy to get in touch with. You can send me a message through my website at markdennyphotography.com, or reach out to me at any of the various social media channels that are popping up on the screen right now. Just send me a message and I'll get back in touch with you. So I do hope that was helpful, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.